Hello and welcome to the actual episode 13 of my Kerbal Space Program NASA series. We're picking up where we left off, doing some observations operating the Cacti telescope. And you can already see that UI is looking a lot better. I've got the proper colors, proper fonts. The graphics artifacts and screenshots aren't going to go away, and I don't think I'm going to be able to fix the science UI, which you can see is still totally jacked. But things are transmitting correctly. The thing is working correct. It's working perfectly for what I need it to do, so I'm going to consider that as fixed as I'm willing to. Just doing some observation of the Julian system, because it being on the night side of the planet, I don't have to run the risk of accidentally pointing at the sun and blowing up the processor. That puts us over the top, so we can unlock another tech node, and this one having a couple more experiments in it and some fancy new processors for our telescope makes it the most obvious choice. So we pick that out. And this begins the construction of the International Space Station. I'm doing things a little out of order. I don't have a Duno window to send a Mars Pathfinder mission yet, so we're going to get started on this to kind of run the clock out while we wait for those transfer windows to come through. And this is my equivalent of the Zarya service module, which was the first part of the space station orbited. It was launched by a Proton rocket. And this, incidentally, being my best stab at a Proton with the available parts. Blow that fairing off. And I tried to make this resemble the Zarya module as much in profile as I could. And so that's why it's got that weird cargo bay, which isn't quite totally round in the middle. And Zarya was originally the main life support and logistics module for the International Space Station, and so that's the purpose I've built into it. Also put a generous amount of RCS fuel and the plant growth experiment from the Station Science pack on there, just so I'd have a place to put it that kind of fits in with the general look of the station. Deorbit this upper stage. And here we see the first flight of Space Shuttle Avalon. I'm not using actual Space Shuttle names, but I've got a system for my dorky self. The Space Shuttle Atlantis is named after a lost city starting with an A, and so is this one. Atlantis meet Avalon. Unfortunately, I got a little hasty in putting it together and didn't notice until after I'd launched that I had picked an older revision of my shuttle. This one doesn't have speed brakes, and I've got my braking parachutes in the wrong place. That will become an issue, but right now my hands were full because it had started a death roll. That heavy tank has a habit, if it starts getting too far off its roll axis, that it wants to fall down and be the lowest point of the shuttle. Once it goes into that death roll, I've never been able to get a shuttle into orbit once that roll begins. However, this miraculously, I was high enough up, I say miraculously, I was high enough up in the thinner atmosphere that I was able to use RCS to get it under control eventually. And I had an excess of Delta V, got lucky because it was a lightweight payload I've got in there. It's only carrying my equivalent to the Unity adapter module, so there wasn't a lot of mass in the cargo bay. So I was able to burn off some extra fuel and not completely ruin my Delta V and the ability to rendezvous and get back. But that was a little tense because I do not have ejection modules on my space shuttles. At that point, if I had ejected, my Kerbals probably, they might have burnt up on re-entry, now that I think of it. So. And keeping the ejection module off the space shuttle kind of puts the onus on me to try and save the shuttle while it's flying instead of just eject and let it crash. Because as I said, having these things with their own custom nameplates, if I lose one, then I'm going to consider that one destroyed for the sake of the playthrough. And I'm making things more difficult on myself than I need to, trying to go with these direct descents. I eventually stopped that, but I ended up burning a lot more RCS on my way up here than I was planning because I tried to do that maneuver. It wasn't too bad, but I was being pretty cavalier with how I used the maneuvering fuel. Get my rendezvous close, and then just kind of burn in with RCS. And I'm not intentionally trying to hide the Unity module. My thing is, when I dock, I pay so close attention to these to that docking interface. I don't exactly pay attention to framing my spacecraft in any type of attractive way to show off what I'm doing. It's a habit I really need to break, just to make these more interesting to watch. But on the other hand, I was actually quite surprised at how easy it was to get this module attached and how responsive the Space Shuttle was. It's one of those rare occasions where I build something to function and look good, and I end up pulling off both. Normally I can only manage to either have it look really great or function really great. But this is one of those rare instances where I hit both points. The only problem is, because it is a space plane, I don't have my RCS blocks perfectly balanced around the center of mass because it shifts all over the place during flight, and depending on payload. So it doesn't exactly pivot around a center point that I have my payload on anyway. But get this reasonably close. The rotation's off by about 2 degrees when it finally snaps in, but that's not too terrible. And I tried to make... I could have gotten away with just using that quad docking port adapter structural part, but I wanted this to look like it was possibly pressurized, so I put those plates and the 2.5 meter KW adapters on there. I put that effort into Unity, but now that I look at Zarya, I should have used a different part instead of those girders in the center to attach those solar panels, because that's obviously impossible to move the crew beyond that module, realistically speaking. But I didn't notice that until right as I was docking that piece, and at that point I was fairly well committed. It's a pretty uneventful return, apart from the fact this being an older shuttle without the air brakes, so I had to come in a lot shallower than I used to, and in fact, on my approach, I was fairly certain that I had overdone it. I was very doubtful that I had the energy to actually make a landing, so there's a lot of this porpoising where I'm dipping the nose to pick up some airspeed and then raising it to trade airspeed for altitude, so that I will have altitude to trade for airspeed later. It's that wonderful balance of trying to fly a giant glider. And the stall speed on this is about 114 meters a second. At that point, it goes into, the tail starts to drop, and it's very difficult to even get the nose down, and if you're close to the ground, it's just going to be a crash. So I'm just trying to walk that line between getting enough altitude and at the same time getting low enough with enough speed that I have some control when I get to the runway. And at this stage I was 100% convinced that I was going to be trying to land short of the runway and pull off an emergency landing, which never ends well on these heavy shuttles. So I was, again, pretty tense bringing this in because I was fairly certain I was about to see my first crash. However, spoiler alert, everything does work out okay in the end, but there's some other issues related to my parachute placement. But as far as the way I'm landing this, it's really the way the real Space Shuttle was done. The computer handled most of the approach, not the actual final approach, but getting it in position for landing. And so it was up to the captain, once he took over manual control, he or she, once they took over manual control for the landing, to at a 20-degree nose down angle, the Space Shuttle would maintain airspeed, and then at the very last minute above the runway, they'd pull up into a flare to bleed off airspeed and have kind of a gentle landing. This is a pretty good touchdown right there, but that parachute deploys, and being on the vertical stabilizer, it makes a lever effect, And so it kind of pitches the nose up, the angle of attack on the wings goes up, they bite, get lift, and it stalls out. Thankfully it wasn't a terrible crash, but that's why I moved my parachutes. That out of the way, we immediately go into the VAB, and because I have editor extensions, I'm able to put it in spaceplane mode and put my parts on without having to switch to the spaceplane hangar or any of that, and reconfigure it in the VAB as I need it. And this is being removed from the launch rotation for a while to kind of simulate having to be sent to the shop for retrofit. And this is the launch of the Zvezda service module for the International Space Station. It's the first habitable volume to be installed, and this is one of those rare cases where I built something to look better than it flies as far as accuracy goes. This is my Proton Heavy because the Zvezda is a very large module, very heavy. I needed more delta V, and so I just strapped those massive SRBs on it. A real Proton rocket actually has clustered liquid engines like the one we previously saw, but that one just didn't have enough kick to get these things into orbit. But really, SRB separation was the one exciting part of this flight. We just get to a rendezvous, and you see it's a pretty massive piece of equipment there. I had to actually drain fuel from that gray tank that's on top of the lander can so that I could make the rendezvous and have that little extra bit of delta V. Just slowly drift these things together. And I originally did have the solar panels that the real Zvezda module is equipped with, but I added those. What I did to design my space station was I built it all in the VAB and then started breaking bits off into modules and saving them as sub-assemblies. And as far as my modules go in their location and other things, this is going to be very close to a one-to-one representation of the International Space Station, because some of the station science parts don't look like actual space station parts. It's not going to look exactly like it, but I'm going to have all the named modules in the correct places as best as I can. But that's a long way of me saying that this is going to be a very large project for me to put together, and I'm trying to keep it as close to reality as I can, just as far as number of flights flown and number of modules. I think the ones I have that look the most like their real-world counterparts would be Zvezda and Zarya. Everything else is pretty close, but you've got to make compromises. And I was really kicking myself for forgetting to re-add those solar panels, because I didn't notice they were gone until I blew the fairings off. And at that point it was far too late. So I decided to give a little bit of fuel back to the actual space station because we're going to deorbit this stage under RCS. It's not going to need it. Which, in hindsight, I probably should have kept that on there, because deorbiting this thing under RCS was a complete pain. It's still pretty heavy, and those don't have a whole lot of thrust, so I ended up making 3 or 4 passes through the atmosphere until it finally got aero captured. It was a lot of effort and a lot of tedious just waiting. And one of the things that made it harder to rendezvous with this early on was it was classified as debris until that lander can got added, which meant I had to sort out and figure out what was what amongst all the dozens of pieces I've got flying around low Kerbin orbit and high Kerbin orbit. I've been pretty good at building my rockets to dump stages on suborbital trajectories, but I've got a couple Apollo CSMs that have been captured into stable orbits and other such things floating around. This is the first flight of the Space Shuttle Intrepid. This is my equivalent to the Space Shuttle Endeavour. I actually broke the thesaurus out and couldn't find a good enough synonym for Endeavour to name it, so I settled on the name of an old famous aircraft carrier. This is the newest shuttle in the fleet, as Endeavour was the newest shuttle in the US fleet. And at this point, I've given up on direct ascent. I've just started flying into a stable orbit with the correct apoapse, and I'm waiting for my orbital phase to bring me close to my target. That saves on fuel, makes maneuvering a lot easier, and I don't have to worry about pitching the shuttle into one of those death rolls again. I got pretty lucky on this launch because I was able to, just with some minor adjustments of my orbit, get it to where I was within 8.8 kilometers of the space station after a single orbit, which was convenient. I didn't have to spend a lot of time chasing it around, trying to catch up to it. Unfortunately, I underestimated my burn, so I got a little more distance than I was planning on. This mission didn't go exactly perfectly well. That's mainly my fault because I did attach my Canadarm to the shuttle. I was going to use that to install this. And I broke from history here because I wasn't paying attention and I put the wrong payload in. I was supposed to be bringing up the Z1 truss base, which is it's the base of the truss assembly for the International Space Station. But instead I grabbed what is equivalent to the P6 truss. This would have been the part after the Z1, and P6 is actually the end of one of the large solar arrays you see in all the pictures of the space station. It was sent up earlier than the rest to give a little extra power to the station, and then it was moved once the truss started taking shape. So it's not a big deal. I'm going to have to fly the Z1 up on the next mission and then reorganize. I'm cutting these ISS assembly missions down unless I have like a launch disaster or a landing disaster, because it's really a lot of just assembly flights. It's like my Apollo thing. I really enjoy flying them because they're showing off, to me, the capabilities of the Space Shuttle. But it's just playing Legos in zero-G, really. So one shuttle launch looks like another typically. But you can see it's already getting pretty massive. It's already the length of the Space Shuttle, and we're not even maybe a quarter of the way done with this thing yet. Apart from attaching the lab modules and the Soyuz craft, the Russian side of the space station is essentially complete now. Translate the shuttle away, stabilize with the RCS, and get those solar panels deployed. And this is essentially the state of the International Space Station by the year 2000. Finally rename it and classify it as a station so I can actually target it when I make my ascents now. And I was looking at how much RCS I'd burned off on this flight. There I go, anchoring that robot arm for safety's sake. But I was noticing that I'd burnt way more RCS on this than I was planning on, so I decided to steal some from the station. It doesn't need it just yet, and I can fly up more RCS on like a Soyuz or just a dedicated resupply mission. Right now the priority is getting Intrepid back home. So it needs it more than the station does. It already looks pretty good. I'm very happy with how it's turning out. The main thing is I don't know if I made that truss assembly long enough. I could have accommodated another fuselage section inside that cargo bay, but that would have necessitated removing the docking module, and happy accident that the docking module was able to grab the truss even, because that robot arm, I just slapped it in there and it wasn't going to be able to unfold without clipping through or damaging the body. So I ended up just stowing it, and amazingly enough, those Gigantor solar panels in their stowed position were able to not hit the folding doors of that inline Clampotron. And this is when I started running into some technical issues. After transferring the RCS fuel and undocking the shuttle, I shut the game down and went to bed, figuring I'd picked the landing up in the morning. I came back this morning and 64-bit just refused to load. So I built myself a 32-bit save and I built myself a 32-bit install and then imported my save file. And I was able to get it to load, but I have so many mods running that even with active texture compression, you can see the chatterer button is all blurred out. That's with aggressive active texture compression installed. I was running into the upper limits of my RAM, of the RAM tolerance for 32-bit Kerbal Space Program. And so as I'm making my approach here, I'm thinking about hitting quick save, and it crashes. I was trying to avoid quick saving on approach, just there's no opportunity for me to reload. So I ended up having to fly that entire re-entry and approach again, still in 32-bit, and it was a pretty clean landing eventually. It just, you know, once again, it's a really long re-entry profile. Land a little hard, knock some parts off, including the braking parachute. But I got it stopped on brakes alone, parked it, did my little victory dance, hit recovery, or well, system check, then hit recovery, and the game crashed once again. So we reload, go to it on the runway, because I want to make sure that it actually will recover instead of just constantly crashing. And at this point I'm getting really nervous because it's taking longer to load than usual. But eventually it comes back. Hit recovery. And I'm finally able to officially end this mission. I've imported things back into 64-bit after this because it seems like the save's cleaned up a little bit. So I'm hoping that I can keep this going, but I'm running into some pretty familiar issues, and I'm just about all out of duct tape and super glue. But that said, stay tuned for the next episode, and thank you for watching.